This is the tale of two agile teams. More correctly, it's the tale of one agile team that splits into two agile teams. It was more than just an organisational separation. It was an agile separation. Hi, my name is Gary Strawn. Welcome to the 100th episode of Development That Pays. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing and hit the bell icon to make sure you don't miss a thing. We do an episode like this every Wednesday. Actually, not quite like this one. This one's a bit of an epic, a retelling of a tale that first aired in December 2015. A tale that seems to have captured people's imagination. It's a tale of two agile teams. It was 2012 when I first walked into the offices of the BBC. Coincidentally, the same time and the same building as these guys. Funnily enough, I never did see them. Anyway, the software team that I joined was one that I was told did Agile. At the time, I knew very little about Agile, but I could see from the get-go that they weren't doing it by halves. There'd been lots of training, they had all kinds of tools, they were doing all kinds of rituals. We'll get into the specifics of how the team worked in a minute. Fast forward a year and the department reorganised. My team was split in two. Although reporting lines changed, the seating plan didn't. There was one outward indication of change. Where there had been one Agile board, there were now two. Oh, and we did 2 stand-ups every day. Ours at 10 a.m, theirs at 10:15. Ever-observant, it took me a couple of weeks to notice that the other team were doing a different flavour of Agile. I hadn't realised there was more than one flavour of Agile. I discovered that what my team was doing was called Scrum, and what the other team was doing was called Kanban. Kanban? Really? This was a word that I knew from way back, but I knew it in the context of manufacturing. I couldn't immediately see how it applied to the process used by my former teammates. So I went and found the lead developer of Team Kanban to talk to him about it. What's the difference between Scrum and Kanban, I asked. He was ready with an immediate answer. You guys talk about work, we do work. Ouch! In that moment, I learned an important lesson about Agile. It can be an emotive issue. Beliefs can be deep-seated. Team Kanban's lead dev clearly thought Kanban was better than Scrum. I held the opposite view. My view was both strongly held and completely without evidential foundation. I'm older now, and I hope a little wiser. I can now see that the team split was a perfect natural experiment. You know the kind of thing. Take 2 identical twins, separate them at birth, feed one Scrum, feed the other one Kanban, observe the result. So I hope you'll join me on a little forensic investigation, starting with a 20,000-foot view of each of the team's processes. My team, let's call it Team Scrum, worked in 2-week sprints. At the beginning of a sprint, we take ourselves off to a quiet part of the building for a sprint planning session. The product owner would select items from the backlog and we'd play planning poker to estimate the size of each item. We'd continue until we had roughly 1 sprint's worth of cards. Sprint planning over, each developer would pick up a card and set to work. Every morning there'd be a stand-up, 10 a.m. on the dot, and so it would go on day after day, with cards gradually making their way across the board. By about the Tuesday of the second week, we'd expect all of the cards to have moved at least 1 step. It was then a race, a sprint, to get everything tested and ready for release on Friday. We didn't always succeed in getting everything across the board. Any item that failed to make it would be recycled into the next sprint. On the Friday morning, everything in the release column would be packaged for release. Oh, and one last thing to round out the sprint, a retrospective. A chance for the team to get together to reflect on what went well, to discuss what could be improved, and to commit to 1 or 2 action items for the following sprint. Taking stock of the evidence, there's a product backlog, an Agile board, and a done pile. There's a 2-week sprint with a sprint planning session at the beginning. Each day after that, a daily Scrum meeting, aka a daily stand-up. At the end of the process, all the cards that have made it to the final column are packaged for release, and on the afternoon of the last day of the sprint, a retrospective. Moving on to the other team, Team Kanban. As with Team Scrum, there's a backlog, there's an Agile Board, although they call it a Kanban board, and a done pile, but there's no sprint. Instead of a group of cards making their way across the board in a specific time period, cards flow across the board continuously. With no specific release day, it's up to the team to decide when to package for release. They typically wait for a fairly significant feature to be finished and tested before packaging. In practice, that meant releasing once or twice a week. Taking stock of the evidence, there's a product backlog, a Kanban board, and a done pile. No sprint planning, no 2-week period, no retrospective. There is a daily stand-up, and they are packaging releasing, and doing so 2 or 3 times more often than Team Scrum. So much for our 20,000-foot view of the two teams. As good forensic investigators, we should take a few notes. We know that Team Scrum works in 2-week sprints. Team Kanban works in a continuous fashion. Team Scrum has a formal sprint planning session. Team Kanban must have some process to choose items from the backlog, but we don't have any details. Team Scrum does retrospectives. We're not sure if Team Kanban has anything similar. Between sprint planning and the retrospective, Team Scrum loses about half a day of development time a fortnight. The 2-week period doesn't mean anything to Team Kanban, so let's convert the number of days into percentages. One last piece of data to record. Team Scrum releases once every 2 weeks. Team Kanban releases 2 or 3 times in the same period. Looking at the two lists, it's clear that Team Kanban is spending more time working. It's also releasing more often. But is it performing as well as the evidence suggests? No photographs from the time have survived, but we have been able to piece together a couple of images from eyewitness accounts. Exhibit 1 is Team Scrum's board. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Given the position of the cards, I'd guess we're looking at the state of the board from somewhere close to the end of the sprint. Exhibit 2 is Team Kanban's board. And boy, is it crowded. If I just zoom out a bit, yes, there. Your eyes don't deceive you. The column of cards really does go all the way down to the floor. And it's not that we've caught it on a bad day. The board always looked just like this. If I tell you that Team Kanban had 4 developers, you start to get an idea of the scale of the problem. There must be 20 cards in this column. Even if we assume that half of them are blocked, it still means that each developer is working on multiple tickets at the same time. Never a good thing. So what's gone wrong here? It seems to me that in the move from Scrum to Kanban, something has got lost in translation. Actually, 2 things. An effective transition from backlog to development, and a limit on work in progress, the number of items being worked on at any one time. With so many blocked cards on the board, it's clear that they're not doing a good job of transitioning from backlog to development. And it looks like they're on a quest to maximize their work in progress. What's interesting is that Team Scrum is doing a good job in both of these areas. And it's not because it has a particular focus on them. It's happening as a natural consequence of the principles and practice of Scrum. An effective transition from backlog to development is a natural consequence of sprint planning. And a limit on work in progress is a natural consequence of working in sprints. Can we draw any conclusions from what we've seen so far? I'd suggest the following. Scrum done well beats Kanban done badly. Which does beg the question, what about Kanban done well? One of our teams is about to find out in a most unexpected way. It was a dark time for Team Scrum. Our super awesome project manager left the company. We were distraught. We received news that an external Agile coach was to be parachuted in. Someone looked him up online. Very high profile, very expensive, and very, very Kanban. As I said earlier, people who do Agile often have strongly held beliefs, and our ongoing grudge match with Team Kanban had only served to entrench our view that Scrum was awesome and Kanban was rubbish. So we were ready for this so-called Agile coach. We expected him to be pushy and directive, and we intended to push back hard. As it turned out, our new Agile coach, let's call him the Agile one, was neither pushy nor directive. At our first meeting, he said that he had a new Agile Board that he'd like us to try, but only if we wanted to. He proceeded to unroll a piece of A2 paper that he brought along with him. The key to it, he explained, is that each column is wide enough for a single post-it note and high enough for 5. He told us, this is important. By limiting the number of cards in each column, we make sure that things get across the board as quickly as possible. A couple of team members had concerns. Would a post-it stick long enough? Perhaps it would be necessary to bring some blue tack into play. I smiled to myself. If our resistance centered around the relative adhesive properties of post-its and blue tack, the Agile one had already won. And so our unexpected Kanban journey began. The paperboard, together with our winning combination of post-its and blue tack, taught us to keep our work in progress under control. We had learned our first lesson. At the time of his arrival, several cards on our board were blocked. The Agile one asked about one of them. I'm waiting for so-and-so to get back to me, I said. What could we do to move that along? Asked the Agile one. I'll email them today, I replied. Wrong answer. Where's his office? In the next building. Let's go and talk to him. Oh, okay. When? Right now. And off we went. And we found the person, and we had a relaxed conversation. The Agile one asked questions, and what was blocked became unblocked. Effortlessly. None of us could quite match the Agile one's ability to make problems disappear, but we did in time learn the value of talking to people face to face to get issues unblocked. And, in the case of new cards, to make sure they didn't get blocked in the first place. This was our second lesson. Little did we know that there wouldn't be a third, at least not from the Agile one. We'll get back to the tale in just a second. Before we do, a quick note to say I have a cheat sheet for you, the Scrum versus Kanban cheat sheet. Created with the help of the Development That Pays community, it's by far my most downloaded cheat sheet, and getting your hands on it couldn't be simpler. On or around this video, you'll find a link. Click the link, follow the instructions, and it's all yours. All right, let's get straight back to the action. One dark morning, the Agile one brought a guest to stand up. It transpired that the Agile one was moving on to bigger and better things. The guest was to be his replacement. If the Agile one was a little bit Obi-Wan Kenobi, the new guy was more Yoda. A little bit annoying and very into basic training. Where the teachings of the Agile one had been effortless, with the new guy, it was more the school of hard knocks, and he didn't waste any time. Release more often, you must. Sorry, couldn't resist. Well, we explained that releasing in this place was a massively painful process, time-consuming and prone to error. New guy let us know that it was his belief that if you're not good at something, you should do it more often. It was the last thing we wanted to hear, but the first thing that we needed to know. It wasn't long before we were releasing more often than any other team in the company, and doing so with the lowest failure rate. We had learned our third lesson. Actually, that wasn't the third lesson. At least, it wasn't all of the third lesson. New guy also forced us, against our will, to do regular demos to stakeholders. And then were his views on test failure. The man had an eagle eye. The moment he saw a card moving to the left, he'd want to know why, and he'd want to know why right now. Had this guy never heard of the cost of context switching? I'm sure he had, but he wanted us to feel the pain of the card moving left. You see, what he was teaching us was the importance of moving to the right. And that That was our third lesson. Earlier this year, I gave a talk in front of a room full of people. It was on the subject of Agile, and it concerned a team that kind of split in two. Anyway, in preparing for the talk, I tried to classify the Agile teams that I'd been a part of, and I came up with this hierarchy of sorts: superficial, mechanical, competent, and enlightened. The Agile team that I joined way back in 2012 was still wet behind the ears. There was no deep understanding of Agile, but it was a team that was good at following rules and systems. It was a perfect example of mechanical Agile. Mechanical or not, it worked. It was effective. The team was more effective than any non-Agile team I've ever worked with. Under the tutelage of the Agile one and new guy, my team achieved competence and I think was well on the road to enlightenment. Which leaves us with Team Kanban. The members of Team Kanban thought they'd found a way to eliminate the waste they saw in Scrum. But they removed more from the process than they'd intended. They ended up with something that was less than Agile. They ended up with something superficial. They ended up with something that just didn't work. So there it is, the story of my Agile awakening. And now that I've shared my story with you, I hope you'll return the favour by sharing your story with me. Tell me all about it in the comments below. I can't wait to read your stories. Thank you so much for joining me for this special and rather extended episode of Development That Pays. If you enjoyed it, please click to like, share it with your friends, and click the logo right here for a new episode every Wednesday. I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Cheers for now.